Bergman is going to share with us some of the recent advancements in Alzheimer's and dementia. Kemper Cognitive Wellness was formed to help people prevent and push back against cognitive loss. And we work with adults of all ages, but most notably, or most frequently rather, we work with adults that are experiencing cognitive challenges. So anywhere from people that are maybe in their 50s or 60s and experiencing some changes cognitively to perhaps you've got an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia and you're wanting to know what else you can do to push back. We know today that there's a lot you can do, and Dr. Bergman is going to share with us some of the recent advancements in Alzheimer's and dementia assessment and treatment, and also prevention. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you? Dr. Bergman and his family, he's got 5 children, neurodiverse children. He's on the east side of Cleveland, came to us from Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and we are so blessed to have him with us. I will let him tell you more about why he does the work he does, and we invite you to ask questions. I have lots of information out back, and thanks again for being here. So we'll get started.
There are a lot of ways into this talk, but I'll just share with you, I got a call just now, as I was coming in, from a woman in California whose dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, who she told me in 2013 basically reversed his Alzheimer's to where he couldn't drive before. He was able to sort of drive again. He's 88 years old now, and now they want to bring their cousin from another state, from the state, one of the surrounding states of Ohio, to see about her cousin who was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This is a provocative title. Does anybody think the end of cancer is upon us? Right? But does anybody remember what it was like to get a diagnosis of breast cancer 35 years ago, 25 years ago, 15 years ago? Right? So what's changing in the world of Alzheimer's and other kinds of neurodegenerative diseases is that what we had previously not been able to imagine, what we couldn't imagine was possible, are now possible. Right? So others have called it, this is the sort of the dawn of the age of treatable neurodegenerative diseases. And when I say neurodegenerative diseases, I'm talking about diseases of the brain and the neurosystem, so Lewy body dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia. There's so many things we can do now for strokes. Just on and on. Frontal temporal dementia. So I got into this because I myself had issues when I was in my mid-30s. I had terrible, terrible problems with memory. I was losing, full episodes. So it's called episodic memory. I was losing episodes of memory. So not just like word finding trouble, but I mean, I would, like, the most memorable events where it was really like sort of set off an explosion in my mind that I have to do something about this. And this was when I was in my early mid-30s in training, residency. And basically working as a hospitalist 1 month, and at that point I was in charge of junior doctors and medical students. And so we had a team of about 6 or 7 people with us, and then I answered to the attending physician. So I was sort of like the lieutenant. And we were admitting, it was kind of midday, and you're admitting patients, you're trying to discharge patients in the hospital while you do rounds. So there's all kinds of chaos happening in the hospital. And I remember I was thinking, we needed to clear one spot so we could bring in a patient with chest pain. Like if it was down in the emergency room, we needed to admit him to the floor. And I said to my team, where's the EKG? Where's the labs? What happened with this patient? And they looked at me and they said, Nate, we were all downstairs in the ER like an hour and a half ago. You looked at this patient. We looked at the EKG together. We looked at those labs. Don't you remember that? And I was like, I was really stunned. I get emotional thinking about it. And I just at the time though, of course, I just had to bury it and say, yeah, of course, I remember it, and sort of wave it off. But I was reeling inside. And this was going on for a while. long story short, I was getting, in the lowest 10th percentile, like 8th percentile out of 100. So the bottom 8th percentile, the bottom 10 percentile. Is that any better? Maybe that's a little better. And it was really frightening. And it was from those experiences that I started to learn about what we do now. So I'm an internist and geriatrician by professional training, but we do a lot of functional medicine, which, it's just scientific wellness. It's getting into what's going on, why is a person, it's asking a question of why is a person having an issue, not just what is the issue the person's having. Most of us go to a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant or whoever it is that we consume healthcare from, and we want one thing or two things. We want, what's the pill or what's the procedure that will make me better, that will fix me so I can go back to doing what I was doing, instead of asking the question of why do I have these issues? And so, what I'm hoping to do with you today is really change your ideas about what dementia, cognitive decline, and sort of like Alzheimer's are, right? Because what a lot of us are sort of have been trained to believe, and especially if we're like 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75 plus, when you can't remember the words you're saying, or it's taking, the loading time to get from your brain out of your mouth, like the words are taking longer, or you can't remember the names of people like you used to, or you walk into the room and you're like, what did I come in here again for? Like, probably most of us can relate to that. There's a certain amount of that that's normal, but sometimes it's not normal, right? And it depends on the amount, how much it's happening, how often it's happening, what are the circumstances it's happening with. But most of us have probably had it. If anybody relates to this or knows someone that this has happened to, Jenny, I might try another microphone. I'm getting a lot of back. I feel like I'm getting a lot of back noise. But most of us, when we experience that, if we go to a doctor at all, yeah, you're just stressed, oh, you're menopausal, oh, you just have a lot in your mind, oh, you're not sleeping well, oh, you're just getting older. There isn't like one second, It's like, imagine if you went to the doctor and you said you have chest pain, right? Again, 50, 60 years ago it was a different story. Now, somebody goes with chest pain, there's a whole algorithm, sort of a whole menu of services that someone might think about. Thank you. So the problem is, we don't start to think, we're thinking about this in cancer. We're thinking about this in colon cancer, in breast cancer, in prostate cancer in some cases. We're thinking about this in heart disease, right? We're looking early, right? And for most of you, if you haven't heard us talk or someone talk about this subject in this way, you probably don't think, so when I say Alzheimer's disease, how many people think a 55-year-old that's having a little bit of trouble remembering where she goes to work every day? Like, oh, I've been on this road 1,000,000 times, or I've jogged on this path 100 times, and today I'm not sure if I'm supposed to make a left here or right here. Has this happened to anybody? I won't ask you to raise the hand because it's still taboo, but these kinds of things happen to more people than are willing to acknowledge it. And the reason for these, I think that the reason for this is it's pretty complicated. It starts with insurance and life insurance and health insurance, but it is fundamentally based on an idea that there is nothing you can do about Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. There's nothing you could do. So we'll just wait until the very last minute, until someone can't do their life anymore, can't pay bills, they might not be able to use a phone, right? Which is absolutely the wrong strategy. Would you do that strategy with cancer? Would you get the diagnosis and then say, well, I can't feel it yet, right? Or I'm not having blood in the stool yet, so maybe the colon cancer is not that bad. So we have to start to think about Alzheimer's differently, and we are, right? And that's what's coming. Right? So we want to think about Alzheimer's as opposed to someone who's living in a place like Kemper House, which is a great place if you have to have someone in a memory care, assisted living, nursing home kind of a place. But what we want to be thinking is 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And we do have patients that are thinking about these, either because they have a genetic risk or it runs in their family or they're just concerned in general. And And so what this picture shows you, this is from the International Working Group, the National Institute on Aging, and what you see here is that by the time someone has what's called mild cognitive impairment, it's called they're called MCI. It's that one says MCI, which is a pre-dementia state or pre-Alzheimer's state. That's the point in time where someone could walk into a doctor's office, take a test that takes about 10 minutes, and the score would be abnormal, right? By the time the score is abnormal, and I'm talking about, a 30-point score, 30-point test where someone gets 25 or less, they have a problem. This is a red light problem. This is not like, you're borderline. Mild cognitive impairment is a profound amount of brain damage, right? So what we want to avoid is waiting to the point where people even get to mild cognitive impairment, because what we find is, by and large, when people have subtle issues, subtle problems with memory or focus or attention, usually it's memory, or they just can't get things done like they used to at work or at home, they ignore it, or they think there's nothing they can do, and they wait and they wait and they wait. And there's this point at the beginning, you see the further you move back on the left, so I should maybe explain the chart. This chart is basically showing you the further you get to the right, the older you are, right? And just like everything else, the brain ages. So we peak out, our brain incapacity peaks when we're about 27, 28 years old. And then just like the rest of our body, there's sort of a slow degradation, and we're trying to maintain. Now, some things get better, but on the physical level, right, this is kind of how it goes. And so there is a normal amount of aging on our brain. But there's a departure for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 30 years in situations with Alzheimer's and other dementias where there's this like lead time, where there's these little bitty tiny symptoms, and people tend to ignore them. If you get nothing out of tonight's talk, one thing I invite you to reconsider is the fact that there are many, many things you can do. There's no magic pill, there's not one thing, there are many things you can do, and we'll explain why that'll make more sense to you as we kind of go through. So far, what we've seen, and this is sort of Nate Bergman's rendition, review of the literature, and then also what we see in clinical experience, and I run a study group for people that do this kind of work for the last 6 years, and this is sort of collectively what we've seen, what works with consistency to improve brain function. I'm talking about people that already have dementia, so somebody that has so much brain damage that they can't get through their day on their own, mild cognitive impairment. We've published cases in peer-reviewed medical journal, and then in certainly a lot of cases of what we call subjective cognitive impairment, meaning I know I have a problem, but it's hard for me to explain my problem, or my primary care doctor told me, you don't have a problem, you're just stressed out, or you're just going through menopause, or you're just depressed, or you're just anxious, or something like that. So this is the summary, right? So the first thing is, get on it early, just like you would with breast cancer, just like with prostate cancer, colon cancer, just get on top of it early. And it's easier said than done these days because there's not that many people yet doing this kind of work, and there are reasons for it. It's hard to do quickly. You can't do this in half an hour. You can't do this in 45 minutes. It takes some time to sort of make determinations on what's going on with someone. We'll talk about what would be involved, what a good workup or evaluation would look like. Next thing that we tend to do is, for some people, and it's not everybody, we put them on a ketogenic diet. Going into ketosis seems to resuscitate brain energy. And this doesn't mean lifelong ketogenic diet. Has anybody heard of a ketogenic diet? Who here has heard of a ketogenic diet? Okay, who feels like they could explain a ketogenic diet? So it's a high-fat diet. It's like let's say, so it's where between 70 and 90% of your intake comes from foods that are high-quality fats. That's a lot, right? It's a lot. But it provides an alternative source of energy that some people describe as sort of like a battery-powered versus gasoline-powered or diesel fuel-powered. The diesel fuel, our normal diets, tend to have a lot of sort of byproduct, and a ketogenic diet burns cleaner. And it seems to resuscitate, there's some literature, it seems to resuscitate the way that the brain processes energy. right? And so we've seen, I mean, I just had a guy here today diagnosed, had a problem since he was 2014. He's now 65 years old, but really, really declined in the last year and a half. And he actually he went on a ketogenic diet earlier this year and had pretty quick results. He was back in meetings, clear in his meetings. He runs a company. And this is a guy with Alzheimer's, diagnosed at University of Toledo with Alzheimer's. And he's improving, right? So he's improved and he's stabilized. It's amazing when it works. It's amazing when it works. And it works for probably, the ketogenic diet probably works for more than half of the people that go on it. Next one is, no surprise, exercise. And we'll talk about what we mean by exercise, not just any exercise. Gardening and walking are not the same as the kind of exercise we're talking about. Exercising with your body and your brain, and preferably doing them together at the same time, ideally, right? And doing it enough, right? For long enough times a week, right? Going to one class a week or going on a treadmill and walking a half a mile on a treadmill, that's good. I don't want to, it's a process, getting to where we're trying to get to is a journey. But there are some things that we kind of feel like we know at this point, where if you're trying to grow back a brain that's shrinking because of Alzheimer's, where it's under all kinds of, there are a variety of insults, or it's network functions, electrical functions not working well, we need enough, right? And we tend to really have to review this point with the people we see in our clinic kind of over and over and over, is what constitutes enough. And it's usually not what people think. The next thing is sleep issues. I'll talk a little bit about sleep issues as we move forward. Dental issues, I'm not going to spend too much time, but I know our practice, my practice, has changed here in the last year and a half, 2 years. And I'm being much more aggressive looking for periodontal disease. So if any dentists are here, if I learned from my dental colleagues, so like one easy way that certain kinds of bugs, infections, similar to like COVID can kind of travel up into the brain and seems to be associated with Parkinson's and maybe associated with the development of Alzheimer's. We've certainly seen it. We've seen getting COVID and then the COVID brain fog unmask things like people that have Parkinson's that runs in their family might unmask a Parkinson's, or it might unmask other kinds of sort of memory and cognitive symptoms. So too, if you have in this space, when you go to the dentist or the dental hygienist, like they're measuring, they start to measure at the beginning, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 centimeters, and if it's like more than 3, it's abnormal. If it's more than 4, you're getting sent to the periodontist. So what live there are bugs and inflammation that can travel quickly up to the brain. They can actually, they're connected to heart disease and they're connected to Alzheimer's. So treating periodontal disease, others have seen, and we haven't seen this yet, but others are reporting that when they are aggressive about fixing periodontal and dental issues, people will have improvements in cognition. So that's a relatively new one. You'll see it in the literature, but we're starting to see people, especially fixed issues with sleep and dentition, have improvements that are fairly quick, and we're talking on orders of weeks to months, in improvements in mood and cognition, so brain function. We'll talk a little bit about technology and the role of technology to accelerate results, not in lieu of doing the other things, but to accelerate the kinds of results we're getting and we're seeing. And then, if someone already has dementia, if you or someone you care about already has so much trouble or so much, let's call it brain damage, that they are not able to live on their own safely day over day or week over week, there's still quite a bit we can do. I mean, we work with many, many families, many people, like Kemper Cognitive Wellness, where I work. A good percentage of what we do is just helping people through this, and I'm very proud of the work we're doing in the sense that we're trying to change the landscape about what it means to have Alzheimer's. Like, it's still possible to live well with dementia or well with Alzheimer's, but it really takes a change in our perspective. And so, again, a lot of what we do is just trying to get the word out on this, that it's possible, right? So let's say you're having an issue. What do you do? What do you do? Who do you go to see? So primary care doctor is a good place to start because there are so many good primary care doctors. It's just, at this point, it's a little unfair to expect most primary care doctors, and I trained as a, partly as a primary care doctor, it's hard to expect a PCP, a primary care anything, nurse practitioner or doctor or whatever, to sort of have this depth of knowledge or skills and especially in like a 20-minute, 30-minute visit. But what they can do is maybe point you out to a neurologist or someone like us, so what we do, that's able to double-click on some of these issues, right? Not just sort of, okay, well, that's it, stress, and try an antidepressant, because, I've seen that. I remember the first time I saw a 52-year-old, I saw her when she was 54, 55, she just passed away last year, 57 years old, of Alzheimer's dementia. She went through a stressful experience, a couple of stressful experiences, and we see these stress as a trigger sometimes to sort of spark a dementia. I've seen it multiple times now, and we've confirmed this with others, where someone had just like a prolonged stress. Sometimes it's just like planning a wedding or some job-related or relationship-related stressor. And as a result of that, is unmasked a sort of a confusion or an irritability or a frustration. And if someone is 52 years old, like this woman was 52 years old, so she went to her doctor. Doctor sent her to the OBGYN. OBGYN said, well, this is obviously menopause, and put her on antidepressant, which helped a bit. And 2 years later, she was, could barely talk, right? She was fully demented. That's when we saw her when she was already fully demented. So when you're seeing a 52-year-old, you're not thinking, oh, this is probably dementia. Like, you're not thinking that. You're just thinking, okay, this probably is perimenopause, right? But you have to ask the right questions. So you got to go to the right person. That's first of all. And then the second thing is, and this I learned when having my own memory experiences, you probably want some kind of neuropsychologic evaluation. That can be computer-based. That could be in office. The gold standard is to go to a psychologist that has extra training with neuropsychology, talk to them for about an hour in an interview, and then go for about 2.5 hours of testing, different aspects of brain function, memory, all different aspects of brain function. And you get a pretty good report. And that's actually my personal preference, is to get neuropsychologic testing. And in our office, we do limited computerized evaluations, take about a half an hour to 40 minutes, that are validated, these are validated tools. And so short of going to full neuropsychologic testing, we used an extensive battery of sort of brain tests, if you will. And then the last thing are sort of pictures of your brain. You can get a picture with a CAT scan, or you can get a picture with an MRI. And I prefer the MRI better because we get much, much richer information. But still, that only tells about the structure of the brain. The MRI or a CAT scan only tells us about the structure. The structure is typically the last thing to go, right? Meaning, usually what happens is there's a breakdown in the energy, the energy flow, if you will, right? Electrical flow in some area of the brain. Typically, Alzheimer's is typically in the back or on the sides here, if you push through your nose or through your ears, so the convergence deep down there. And by the time you get shrinkage, something's been usually happening for a while, if the report is accurate. And what we can often get is sort of an earlier detection or a sense of what the brain is actually doing with either certain kinds of a PET scan, which are not readily available and usually not paid for by insurance, a SPECT scan, which are even harder to get here in Cleveland, if at all. Usually for this kind of issue, they're not doing them in Cleveland. And what we do is a brain map, a QEEG, and I'll show you some of that later. It's an EEG, and we get a sense for what the brain is doing. Like, what is your brain doing? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Is it off on the left? Is it off on the right? And which network is off? So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that's what I would say is just like a good basic, right? Now, if you go to your primary care doctor, or maybe even a neurologist, and they don't do a test like this, you have to probably find a new doctor. Right, this is a simple 8 to 10 minute office-based test called a Montreal Cognitive Assessment. If you're someone who's having an issue right now, you can just go online, Google MoCA, one of the versions of MoCA, find a YouTube video, take about 5 minutes. It'll tell you how to administer this. You can't do it for yourself. You have to have someone do this for you. And just see what your score would be, right? And this tells you a little bit about, this is the score this is the one I was telling you, the 30-point test, and if it's 25 or less, it's abnormal. This is a nice sort of quick and dirty, hey, is there a big, big problem? If your score is 25 or is less than 26 on this, we need to talk, you know what I mean? Like it's a problem. Like there's something happening. So this is just a quick office-based test that you can do on your own or through a primary care doctor. So if you're having an issue, you know somebody's having an issue, a MOCA, a Montreal Cognitive Assessment, it's a really simple, straightforward place to start. And we do these all the time in our office. I mentioned the MRIs. I don't want to belabor this too much, but there's a certain kind of analysis that you can get in your brain and of your brain that you can only get in Cleveland, you can only get at a couple of different places in the Cleveland Clinic. But it's rather than just a regular MRI. Has anybody ever had an MRI of the brain? I know a couple of people here have. So if you've ever had an MRI of your brain, usually just the radiologist looks at it, says, okay, no stroke, no tumor, tumor's shrunk. I see this area that maybe there's some low blood flow, maybe that was like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, it's white matter, called white matter hyperintensities. But what it doesn't do, and this has sort of been proven out time after time after time, is radiologists, even people that have 2 years extra training in neuroradiology, it's very hard for them to look. You see those little areas in red? Oh, I'm sorry, in yellow, with where the yellow areas are pointing? So those are areas called the hippocampus, and that's a classic biomarker for Alzheimer's, right? And when those things shrink down below 25%, it's considered abnormally small. But a neuroradiologist, it depends on the day. What if they're reading kids all day? What if they're reading, they don't tend to do a good job of estimating what's small. So there are now machine learning algorithms, sort of AI, that will help a radiologist by painting different colors of the brain. I'm talking about the pictures of the brain, obviously, not the actual brain. But they'll paint pictures of the brain. They'll paint sort of colors, color enhancements for different areas of the brain. And then we can get an idea about which areas are too small, which areas might be too large, right? But you have to get it ordered correctly, and this can be a hassle even for people that are very, very proactive and know what they want. It can still be ordered incorrectly. So that's called a MRI with volumetrics, and right now in Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic is the only place to get it, but even then you have to see a neurologist or someone that knows how to actually order it. Okay. When I was in I did my geriatrics fellowship here in Cleveland at the Cleveland Clinic, and when we would diagnose with someone with Alzheimer's, this is what we would do. We would tell them to get basically tell them to eat more vegetables, try to socialize, learn a new language, right? Tell someone with dementia, learn a new language. Like that's never happened. I've never had one person learn a new language that already was diagnosed with dementia, right? And it's a very sort of morbid, we literally used to give the age page, getting your affairs in order, and a durable power of attorney, and that was it. And that was it was no social worker, it was wild. And it's still pretty much the standard of care. That's still pretty much how it goes, right? So we're providing an alternative, right? Many people, though, are waiting for what is the drug or the procedure, the surgery that will help me, right? Well, we had our first sort of, everybody catch the news on Aduhelm or aducanumab over the summer in June, right? The FDA gave something called an accelerated approval for this medicine. Now, Alzheimer's community, it's been like 20 years since we've had a breakthrough, so we've had another approved medication. And there was a lot of pressure on the FDA from the Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's sort of industry, Alzheimer's Association, a lot of the companies that are doing the research, patient advocacy groups, like we need something, even though some of the data that we'll talk about after this has outperformed these medicines for years. But most of us are aware that people are looking for what's the pill or the procedure. So this is an IV medicine that has to be given very often, and in these randomized control trials, usually for the FDA to give a full approval, you need 2 large randomized control trials. Neither of the two that were supposed to lead to Aduhelm's approval were successes. In fact, they folded the study. I remember when they folded the study in 2019. But they did a reanalysis and found that people at the highest doses actually had maybe some slowing down of their symptoms in 1 out of the 2 trials. And so they got an accelerated approval for that, right? And what these medicines do, they're called monoclonal antibodies, right? There are monoclonal antibodies being used all over the place in COVID and cancer and allergy and immunology. I mean, this is not a new technology. But what it does is it removes clumps of what we think and what seem to be very associated with Alzheimer's. They're called amyloid clumps. But what this still doesn't ask is, why does someone get amyloid plaques? Why does someone have this buildup, right? Why does someone have the buildup? Because what they've found is they'll remove these clumps, and people often don't get better. And so, so it's sort of an incomplete understanding of what's happening. And, that's where we're at. It still is somewhat incomplete understanding. But what this failed to recognize is that there are so many things that you can do where there's already data that there can be more improvement than these drugs have shown, right? Because these newer ideas about Alzheimer's, and these are not that new, but we're talking about in the last 7, 8, 9, 10 plus years, is that there are multiple causes. There are multiple reasons someone might get Alzheimer's. And what that has given rise to is the idea of the concept of multi-component therapy. It's called multi-domain therapy in the literature, meaning not just one thing, right? HIV, people usually on 3 or 4 medications. Now diet, now HIV. Cancer, it's usually not one. My mother-in-law had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which she beat. She was on 4 chemotherapeutic agents, right? 4, right? People get radiation, people get surgery. So, even heart disease, just the medicines alone, forget about diet and exercise, but just the medications alone, if somebody has heart failure or they have a problem like a heart attack, they get put on usually 4, sometimes 5 medicines, because there's a recognition that these diseases, they're complicated, right? It's not like strep throat. Right? Strep throat, you treat the Streptococcus pneumoniae like it's a bug, and you take the penicillin or the penicillin, whatever's like penicillin, an antibiotic, and people usually get better. These Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, they're much more complicated. Like the pathways, the things that give rise to Alzheimer's are many, right? And so I love this term Dementogens, right? Maybe you've heard this. Allergens, things that give rise to allergies. Carcinogens, things that give rise to cancer. Dementogens, right? And no surprise, it's not a short list, right? It's not a short list. It's many things. It's many things. But every single one of us has at least one of these things, right? We've known for a long time high blood pressure and cholesterol. It's still amazing how many, I see a lot of people that are proactive. They want to take, they'll want to do things with lifestyle and diet, and they'll be willing to take supplements, but they're not willing to take blood pressure medicine. And their blood pressure would be like 150 on the top. And how many people when was the last time, has anybody here raise your hand if you've checked your blood pressure in the last week? And I'm going to raise my hand. Right, so there's no way that we that we all shouldn't kind of know what our blood pressure is week over week, because it's such an easy way to prevent so much brain, heart, kidney, and eye damage. There's no way we should all of us, insurance should be paying for all of us to get like a $30 to $50 blood pressure cuff, and be checking it at home. Just check it at home. What is your heart rate? What is the top number? What's the bottom number? Top number on the blood pressure, it should be somewhere about 120, 130s or less. There are circumstances where that's not true, but for the most part, that bottom number, probably 60s, 70s somewhere. If you're in the 80s or 90s, there's probably, you need to be talking about it. And it's like a simple thing, because even the blood pressure medicines are cheap. Many of them are really good at this point, and they're minimal side effects. So we've all known about those things. But what's new is like this idea that we can kind of measure inflammation. What's new is that like sleep apnea, who knew sleep apnea is associated? Who knew that anxiety and PTSD and depression, although depression we have known for a while, but anxiety and PTSD and not treating them even in midlife are associated with development of Alzheimer's and other dementias. ADHD, which I was diagnosed with, is associated with the development of Alzheimer's 6 times higher, right? Even if you are a family member with someone with ADHD, your risk is higher to get Alzheimer's and dementia, right? And the new one, this was the new one last year, American Academy of Neurology, air pollution is associated with Alzheimer's disease. We've known about it for Lewy body dementia to some extent, Parkinson's, and Parkinson's has a component that can be dementia, but Alzheimer's, right? And we see this so far with air quality, but basically toxins, right? So a lot of things, right? A lot of things. It's hard to get out of this unscathed, you know? The exciting thing is that there's starting to be evidence that we can do something about it. So this is not new. This is, you know, I got my name's on this paper. This was the reversal of cognitive decline led sort of by Dale Bredesen. Has anybody heard of Dale Bredesen? Dale Bredesen's work. We submitted a couple of cases for people that had very clear pre-Alzheimer's, right? The mild cognitive impairment, and they had really significant improvements. One guy went back to work. One woman couldn't read anymore. She went back to reading. Like really kind of stunning things. And now they just published another case, another study. Well, it's not been published yet, but the results were released on medRxiv. The actual peer-reviewed paper is pending. But a few months ago, they published the first proof of concept in a group of people that had mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's disease. 25 people, 21 out of 25 people had a really significant improvements. 84% improved, not just slowed down their progression, improved. Those medicines that we talked about before that the FDA approved, like what they talked, their endpoint was slowing down decline. These people improved. What if you combined the medicines and this stuff? Like that to me that's sort of the holy grail, you know, like combining. It's the combinations, it's multi-domain, it's multi-component therapy, not just one thing. It fails to recognize the reason that people develop Alzheimer's, right? Like a lot of reasons. Okay, this is a colleague. He's become a little bit of a friend, Richard Isaacson. He's at, has anybody heard of Richard? Richard, to me, has moved the needle the most in the academic world in Alzheimer's prevention. Richard he did his undergrad and medical school in 6 years. Remember Doogie Howser? So Doogie Howser did, and he did his neurology residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard, in Boston, and then did extra time studying neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, and for a long time was sort of just the only academic voice talking about Alzheimer's prevention, and he could never get his studies published, never, ever. Like the Journal of Alzheimer's Association he just told me he used to get laughed out of the party. This, you can see here, this is at Cornell in New York City. I was there in November of 2019. This is him. We were hanging out, and he showed me his office, and we kind of took a walk around New York City, went to his apartment. He just had their first kid at that point. He's married to another doctor. And he's got an Alzheimer's prevention clinic at Cornell, right? And finally, if you see at the bottom of the right, this was a watershed moment for us. And we had him on our podcast, Evolving Past Alzheimer's, to talk about this because it was so exciting. If you see the name of the journal is Alzheimer's Dementia. So that was his first real paper that he got published in the Alzheimer's Association. So now everybody's talking about prevention and brain health. But it was, Richard published his first thing, and he had to publish it as a book in 2012. So it takes time for these concepts, as we all know, to matriculate their way into sort of an insurance reimbursable kind of a practice. But things are moving, and there's good news. Like, it's very exciting. This is unbelievable, And even for people that have dementia, and this is one of the things, as an aspect as a company, one of the things that we do that I think is kind of unique, like prevention is where it's at, optimization, being the best at sort of every age, to the extent that people want and are focused on it. But even for people that have dementia, and again, the idea of dementia is people have so much cognitive loss that they can't do their life day to day independently. It starts with things like driving or paying bills or getting frustrated at technology or whatever. But as if you've known someone with Alzheimer's or another kind of dementia that's gone through the so-called long goodbye, right? There's a point at which they might not even be able to be aware that they have to go to the bathroom, and then even if someone puts food in front of them, they won't be able to eat it or wouldn't eat it. So there's all kinds of levels or layers of severity. But for people that can still basically walk, follow some instructions, we built an environment and are running this right now, like this exists now in Rocky River at CrossFit, BrainFit, where we're working with people that have objective, like we tested them, other doctors in many cases have tested them, neurologists, et cetera, and we are working with people to give them back as much skill as possible, right? So we train them with exercise, brain training, and we use some fairly simple technology that they wear during it to accelerate the process. But this is a whole field that's sort of emerged since 2017, and I would say the Australians seem to be further ahead on this than we are, at least in the available peer-reviewed literature. But it's like the idea of trying to get some skills back. But the key is frequency and intensity. You have to do, like we have people come in 5 days a week for 2 hours a day. It's a big commitment, right? It's a big commitment. But if they're facing Alzheimer's, and if anybody's been a caregiver or known someone with a dementia, it's an enormous, I don't want to say burden, but it's an enormous thing to go through. And obviously, none of us know what it's like to go through unless we've gone through this with someone else. And so this idea of cognitive reablement, of neurorestoration, is extremely exciting, because what we're trying to do is, there's a breakdown, right? There's just in cancer, the problem is that the cells are growing out like this. In Alzheimer's and other dementias, the problem is the downsizing. It's like things are shrinking. The size of the brain is shrinking, and then all of the important functions of those brain cells that are dying and no longer viable are lost, right? And so you start to see people that stabilize, or you start to see people, hey, like just today, the guy that runs our BrainFit program texted me. He said, hey, Miss H, she just joined like a couple weeks ago. She went to see her primary care doctor, and her primary care doctor noticed that something was different with her. She's got mild cognitive impairment. She's in her 80s. She's pushing. She's in the gym. Like she's in there 5 times a week. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's not like miraculous. It's work. You know what I'm saying? This is not like magic, right? It's not like some magic pill or some magic formula supplement. But it's pretty neat, and I love doing this. And so, what are the keys, right? Here they are. Nothing new. No surprises there, right? None of us want to see this, right? We just had Halloween, for those that are aware of Halloween still, Thanksgiving, Christmas. It's it's just a hard time to do some of these things, and we don't have to be perfect, but we do have to just get a little better every day, right? That's the goal, is to get a little bit every day. And we'll never get away from nutrition. We'll never get away from the kind of movement that we do, and the kind of sleep that we get, the quality of sleep, how we manage our own stress, and being able to tolerate basically more distress. The last year and a half have taught us anything, how to tolerate more distress and uncertainty. And there's some techniques. There's some techniques for this. And then being a little bit more aware of the things in our environment. And I'll talk about these. But if we don't start to think at least in the United States, and this is a soapbox moment, since I literally am on a platform, right? So if we don't think about these things as medicine, and we have to go to the doctor to get the pill or the procedure, I don't know what, at a certain point you say, what are we doing? It's great to have a pill or a procedure, but the pill and procedure so I can go back to McDonald's and not exercising, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at some point, right? So let's talk in detail a little bit about these. So food. I love to ask, what is the healthiest diet? I just love to hear what people's answers are. What, is a vegan diet the healthiest diet? Vegan diet? Ketogenic diet? I talked about the ketogenic. It can't be the wrong answer to ketogenic diet if I told you the summary of knowns ketogenic diet, right? I think it depends a little bit, right? If somebody has heart disease, diabetes, probably a vegan diet's a really good way to do it. There's some evidence for that. Low fat, lower fat. If somebody's got a brain problem, a ketogenic diet might be a better one. I think in terms of sustainability, I think at the last talk we gave, a woman said the Mediterranean diet, right? It's out there. It's Google, YouTube. They'll find the Mediterranean diet and bring it to you. Right? They'll bring it to our attention. And the reason I think that's true, Mediterranean diet, or something called the MIND diet, which is sort of like The Mediterranean diet, light. It's like Mediterranean diet meets Weight Watchers. It's like points. You can have foods off the diet, but only this many, this much pastry and this many servings of dairy each week, because they're sustainable. I think that because they're sustainable, it's the reason why most people would say a Mediterranean diet. Like ketogenic diet's hard to sustain. Vegan diet depends on who you are, but that can be hard to sustain. But mostly, right, the point here is, without getting into all the problems with the diet literature and science of diet, my wife's a dietitian, so we know something about this at least. And I just go back to Michael Pollan's food rules. Anybody read Michael Pollan stuff? Basic food rules, like just eat mostly plants, real food, so food that has to stay in a refrigerator or freezer so it stays somewhat fresh. If it can stay on a shelf for 2, 3, 4 months, and certainly 2, 3, 4 years, right? There's a lot that's not living in that, right? And if we think about food as information for our body that create a cascade of metabolic events, right? Food is like information, and it's doing stuff to us, right? We tell it's a funny story. My nephews were in town, and my sister and her husband have like 4 kids, and we have 5 kids, and so it's a lot of energy when we get together. And the oldest now, they're like 13, 14 years old, and they're like a pack, if anybody has a big family and get together with cousins, it can be fun. But they wake up, sometimes on the weekends, we have sugar cereal. This was the custom, and my mom is an MD, and we weren't allowed to have Frosted Flakes, those kinds of, but one day a week on the weekend, we were allowed to have sugar cereal. And so I think whatever it was, Cocoa Pebble, we had something around, some garbage. And I would say to these kids, I'd wake up with them usually in the morning because they like to get up first thing. That's the first thing they go to. It's like, and I'd say, just so you guys know, it's not food. It's toxic, right? It's not food. You can have it. Like I'm trying not to give you an eating disorder, but it's toxic. It's not food. So by the end of the week, one of my nephews is coming up to me. He's like, Uncle Nate, I had 2 bowls of toxic, whatever it was, this. And so I thought, okay, mission accomplished, right? Like I'm not trying to stop them, but at least plant the message, not food. Like you're eating it, but it doesn't mean it's food, right? Like you catch my drift, right? It's not food, right? Okay, mission accomplished. But the idea is just mostly plant, and not too much. You just don't, there's a tremendous literature, mostly from animals, because we can't do these kinds of studies ethically on humans, and some would argue we can't really do them ethically on animals. But the idea is that caloric restriction, fasting's all the rage now, fasting mimicking. Right? So fasting can be, in the right circumstances, pretty useful. But overeating too many calories is a huge problem. There are a lot of chemical metabolic reasons for this, but basically, when we eat, especially at night, a lot of people skip breakfast. It should be the other way around. We probably should have a bigger breakfast, a smaller lunch, and either skip or have a small dinner. We tend to do it just socially. It tends to be inverted because of how we live here. But the idea is to eat further away from bedtime, smaller meals, right? So the body can clean up, right? If you have a lot of food in your system at night, the body can't sort of shut the lights off and do what it needs to do while it sleeps. It can't do the cleanup that it needs to do. And it does a lot of pruning and refining and fixing. And if it's distracted by having to deal with digesting, it can't do those things. And that's another area where we see pretty good results over time when it's practiced over time. All right, let's talk about movement. Who here exercises? Trish, and I'd like to answer because I know you do. Other than Trish, who here exercises 5 times a week or more? Okay, so this is good. All right, this is good. I'm at about 4. And I'm getting better. So this exercise is about dose, intensity, and frequency, right? And it's also about what you like, People, if you're not an exerciser, or you never liked moving, you didn't like dancing, you didn't like what, so anything you do is good. Going out and getting a pair of shoes to go to the gym, that's a good step, right? That's a win. So I'll take whatever I can. But people say, what's the best kind of exercise? The kind you'll do. That's first of all. But if someone's like, okay, no, but I'm comfortable moving, and I don't, I have limited pain, because the other one that we hear a lot is, but I can't, doc, because I have pain. I have pain. And look, I've injected knees, and we've done a lot of, and I've had pain myself, and I continue to have stuff, sports injuries from when I was a teenager. But what's amazing is a lot of times when these people that won't exercise because of pain or hadn't been exercisers are now in their 70s oftentimes when I meet them, with the right coaching and enough motivation, like purpose and commitment, which is a huge thing, when they start to move, they feel better. Oh, I didn't realize that after I did this for a half an hour, my knee feels better, my back feels better, my neck feels better, right? So movement itself is helpful, but it's not like penicillin. It doesn't make the pain go away. It makes the pain go away for that day, maybe the next day, and you have to do it again, right? So dose, frequency, intensity. When we think about exercise, we also think about a few different kinds. We think about the kind that, sort of the Jane Fonda cardio aerobic, right? And that's where the most evidence is right now. But what we're starting to see is that's resistance training. So training muscles, so that could be with weights, that could be against a body, like sort of against your own body weight. So when you combine the cardio with the resistance, that's where we're seeing the best results. And then for the brain, for the mind, for mood, there's another piece, an area that you have to work out the areas of the brain that influence these aspects of mood and cognition. We add in motor and coordination. Motor and coordination. So, people, what's motor and coordination? So, you think of anything. Tai Chi, yoga, dance. Really, like a Zumba class is motor and coordination big time, right? So, anything, want to do with a group, do what you like. Go with your friends. Go where you can find friends that are sort of like-minded. Hey, I feel not healthy now. Where can I go to be with people that are moving in a direction of health? Right? We're seeing this in spiritual communities now more and more. It's really kind of a neat thing. So, and the best thing, and what we see so far, what I think we see the best results with, and these are bear out on in some of the research, is this idea of dual tasking. Dual tasking, so meaning doing a physical exercise with simultaneously, receiving a cognitive load, right? Like a cognitive task. All right, what time is it? Let's see. How much time do we have left? Zoom. Everybody stand up for a sec. Stand up for 1 sec. So this is a simple example of dual tasking. So just start to get your feet pumping. Start going. Right. Start going. So now I want you to start with the number 97 and subtract 8. Just say it out loud. 97 minus 8 is 80. Okay, keep going. Does anybody notice me? So say 89 divided by, no, I'm just kidding. 89 minus 15. And when that's a trainable skill, right? And we have a couple of things that we do. We have brain boot camps, brain where we're operationalizing this and making this so you just show up and have a good time. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so I think so. Yeah, so reading's one skill, but especially it's forcing visualization and stuff. So reading a book and moving, yeah. And I try to do listening. I'll listen to something, listen to a book and move. Okay, what's motor? Stress is bad, right? Stress is bad. Stress seems to be most susceptible. The people that seem to be the most susceptible to stress right now are sort of perimenopause. So 45, 50, 55, 60. There seems to be this unique sliver of time in our lives where we have younger, maybe we still have dependent children, and we may have parents who are now dependent on us. And, this is sort of the crunch or sandwich generation. And stress over time destroys sleep. In some cases, it causes a rise in a stress hormone called cortisol that actually shrinks the brain and makes the brain smaller. So there's endless data on that. That's good. And there are some things that you can do that really change the game on stress. We learned a lot more about stress and trauma last year I will say something about trauma, right? So stress we define as something that is coming at you. That's a change that requires an adaptation from your normal way of doing things, right? A stressor. It could be just, hey, a stress is just I have to lift a 5-pound weight. That's a little bit of a stress. It's fine. It's a good stress. Stress can be good. We all know that, right? But when stress is too much, or stress is so impacting that it leaves an impression and people become trapped, let's say, in that stressor, like a post-traumatic stress disorder, where that sort of is lodged in the body and in the nervous system, because our brains are in our whole bodies, right? And it's not dislodged. That needs a sort of a specialty treatment. That needs a specialty treatment. There are several things that you could do about it. But stress is something that is being studied more seriously, and therefore is being taken more seriously. And it's obviously not as simple as just taking an antidepressant. Sleep, sleep's a big one, right? I would try to get away with like 4.5 hours of sleep for a long time. Like I just, sleep is a waste of time. I don't want to sleep. I just, you have to wake up early. I'm tend to be a night person oftentimes. And lo and behold, I'm developing memory problems in my early to mid-30s, right? No surprise. Caffeine, it's this vicious cycle of people drink caffeine in the morning, they're drinking alcohol in the evening, and alcohol wrecks sleep. The two biggest sleep issues that worldwide and definitely in the United States, there's over 100 sleep disorders. The two biggest ones are insomnia, can't fall asleep or can't stay asleep, fall asleep and we'll wake up at 3 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. This is super common, right? Usually has something to do with hormone cascades, or sleep apnea. And I want to talk about sleep apnea for just 1 second. Sleep apnea is a really big deal. Sleep apnea is not a problem of snoring. The number of times I've had arguments, like conversations, negotiations in a patient encounter with my patients, talking, people say, well, since I don't snore, or my husband snores and the blinds start shaking and I snore, or I kind of snore, or I don't always snore. Snoring is one sign for some people about sleep apnea, right? Sleep apnea is a problem for two reasons. One is that fundamentally oxygen is not getting into your system or one's system in an adequate amount. So that itself is a little bit of brain damage every night. And there's sort of this, we also go through different cycles. We go through different stages of sleep, and we go through that 4, 5, 6, 7 times a night. And sleep and sleep apnea, or something even like we have pre-diabetes or pre-Alzheimer's, you have pre-sleep apnea, something called upper airway resistance syndrome. So if you have any of those, so it can jolt someone out of sleep, even if they don't wake up shaking, but it'll disrupt that sort of normal cycle, just like a washing machine. Sleep is literally like washing machine. And so the cleaning doesn't happen at night. It doesn't happen. This happens night after night after night after night. And so usually my conversations are with mild cases of sleep apnea. There's nothing really mild about a mild case of sleep apnea. That's a major problem. That's like, okay, just have a mild amount of brain damage every night. Does anybody want a mild amount of brain damage every night? I don't know, my kids, I feel like every night, mild amount of brain damage from them, but I'm here with you tonight, so I'm just joking, guys, okay? So you gotta treat it, and there's a lot of ways to treat it. And we can talk about that at a different time. We have whole talks on it. The last couple of things I want to tell you about are what's new. You knew diet, exercise, sleep, stress, environment, the tooth sting. The new stuff is the Human Connectome, right? The Human Connectome. So over the last, really 30 years, but there's been amazing advances in the last 11 years. All over the world, United States we have our own big brain initiative. There's been a lot of funding and a lot of technology and resources dedicated to mapping the connections in the human brain. We call this the connectome, the Human Connectome. And instead of thinking, oh, hey, the front part of the brain does this, the left side is logic, and the right side is sort of like intuition, we are thinking about the brain much more as networks, right? As networks. And these networks are important in the sense that just like laws get made by committees, right? The brain has committees, right? And there are hundreds of potential networks. There are a few, like here you're seeing a default mode network, you're seeing salience network, central executive network. The details for the purposes of this talk are not important, but what is important is to know that we're starting to be able to get, though it's relatively imprecise, we're starting to be able to get a window into these networks. right? We do this with brain mapping like EEGs, but you can do it with some other technologies as well. So I'll just show you an example of what this looks like. So up here on the left, what you're seeing is this is a woman in her early 70s. She has she's diabetes, she's got Alzheimer's, which was her main issue that she came to see us with, struggling to stay on her own, independent. She's got pretty good help from her family, but she lives alone. And what you see here are different speeds. So you're seeing top-down view of the head, of the brain. And white is normal, and yellow or green is abnormal. And what you're seeing is an abnormally slow brain, both in the middle, sides, but then up in the front. And there's some secondary technology we can use that will help us pinpoint this a little bit. And it turns out that when you use that technology, she's got disruptions in her default mode network. This is sort of the sense of, where we are. It's where our mind wanders. When our mind wanders, we're sort of humming in default mode network. There's this sense that there's some data that default network starts to degenerate. So this circuitry starts to come apart or is not as strong as it used to be. What impacts that? What can injure that? So this woman's got ongoing anxiety, but she has trauma since a little kid, right? She had since she was 13, she had major family trauma. She was like 13 years old. More when she was in midlife. She was a successful business lady, and ends up that she's got another big marker of trauma in her anterior, in a place called the anterior cingulate cortex. And so the messages that she passes from sort of the back of the brain, or the networks in the back of the brain, to the networks in the front of the brain that allow us to sort of take in information from our environment and make sense of it and do something with it, are deranged, right? They're deranged. And this was very obvious and very evident with sort of the right lens. Like, there's no way you pick this up in an MRI, and you certainly can't get this in a history or even on neuropsychologic testing. The reason it's important is because what it leads to, right? We're starting to think about other ways other than sort of diet, exercise, sleep, stress, supplements, medicines, hormones, detoxification, etc. Like, we're starting to think about other things, and I call these, others have called these bottom-up technologies. So there's, different ways into the nervous system. Because the important thing to think about and the important thing to understand here is that this is not accurate, and this is just an analogy. I'm not saying this in a precise way, but these pictures of like Chinese medicine, and you see the bottom of someone's foot, like reflexology, that the whole, like the ear is here and the liver is here. It's sort of like the brain is that. So when you see these maps, that's what I'm starting to think about. They map because the brain is in the body. It's not just in the head. Like, the nervous system's everywhere, right? And so the clues that we can get from the brain maps allow us to design either like direct technologies on the brain, or ways to sort of sneak through kind of the side doors to the nervous system, through the ears, through the skin, through sound. It's amazing. So part of what we did in this sort of first pass in the environment that we designed over at CrossFit, called BrainFit, was we're adding a couple of these kinds of things, making sounds, using primitive reflex exercises. We're adding like mantras, like simple things that you don't have to be like a yogi to do, to get to the nervous system in alternative ways, right? So we're trying to do as much as we can to settle down a hijacked nervous system, because part of what drives Alzheimer's and the problems with Alzheimer's are some of the anxiousness, some of the mood, some of the loss of purpose. When I say, you have Alzheimer's and there's nothing you can do about it, have you ever been with someone that's got that diagnosis? I've been with people, like dozens, hundreds of people. I was the one that delivered the diagnosis, right? It's like, and if all you say is, okay, get your affairs in order, and I can have a couple medicines that don't help, like, that's just crazy. That's a crazy thing to leave the room on, right? It doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't have to be that way. But there's so many things we can do. There's so many things we can do, and we're doing them, right? Just being with people. You remember what it was like with COVID? Like, this is going to take us into a topic we don't have time to talk about, embodied cognition, but like, a lot of what allows our brains to develop and grow is the stimulation that you get sitting with other people. It's sometimes a deep conversation with a close friend, a spouse, a sibling maybe, can really be enriching. And then there's something else that happens in a dynamic where you're talking with 3 or 4 or 5 other people, and you're listening and you're responding, right? And there's a certain kind of, especially if you're focused on something, we did an interview with a researcher at University of California, San Diego, which is a top place for brain, mind, and consciousness, where they're showing differences in proteins in Alzheimer's through group meditation. Alice McGinty told me about this guy, Hima Patel. Brilliant guy. So there are ways to do this in groups, we call co-regulation, where you can simmer down your nervous system. Right? It's sort of like not feeling alone, but it's more than that. It's like consciously being together. And you could talk about whatever. You could talk about God, you could talk about friends, you could talk about relationships, you could talk about food, but there's a notion of co-regulation, right? And this happens in sports is the easiest place to see this. Like you go to a stadium where there's 80, 100,000 people, and everybody's screaming about this. It's a very, very powerful thing. People have been to a concert, very powerful thing. We can do this. You can hack this in some ways yourself. So last couple things, just the technologies that we use. Technologies, we talk about the brain maps. We showed you those pictures of what the brain is doing. Fundamentally, the belief is that the brain will respond to the input we give it. So a real life story happened last week. We, in this new environment we built, BrainFit, one guy was coming to us for the last 2.5 years. He's had Alzheimer's since 2015, 16. He's hanging in, he's doing well, he's got a good life, but he's got impairments, right? He can't do all the stuff that he used to do. But we had to stop one of his treatments because we weren't sure how it was going to overlap. He'd been coming to us something called transcranial alternating current stimulation. It's a experimental technology that they come to us for. They come to us, between usually about twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. Sometimes they'll go away, and every time they stop, they notice some kind of decline or a difference. But we had stopped for the last 4 or 5 weeks as we started this program in October. And his wife contacted me and said, I noticed a difference since we stopped the treatments, like in-office technology treatments. And these treatments, there's NIH funding. Again, we just interviewed another guy who's got a $4.5 million study for cognitive aging and mild cognitive impairment using these kinds of technologies. And as I was interviewing him and he was describing this, I was thinking about the people that we see, in particular this gentleman. And last Thursday, was his first time back on the technology since starting in this 2-hour-a-day kind of program. And he was more proactive. His wife describes him as like when he doesn't do them, the treatments, he'll just sort of sit and he'll kind of wait. He's a really pleasant, funny, he's a really smart guy. But he has no sort of initiative. He'll have more initiative. He talks with more sense. He talks with sort of more purpose and clarity. Is more engaged. It's amazing. And all we're doing really is adding very small amounts of energy to his brain. Right. This is called transcranial direct or transcranial alternating current stimulation. There's a couple of other things we do: pink noise, white noise, brown noise, EMF stuff. But it's these neuromodulatory technologies. They're not like. They don't work by themselves. You sort of have to point and make the brain do something. You have to ask the brain to do something, and then the technology is accelerate it. Right? It's not the technologies by themselves, and especially when they're non-invasive, meaning they're not something that a neurosurgeon has to implant in your brain. Just final couple points. How long does it take to improve? So, we've seen. I told you this morning we had a guy that had an improvement with a ketogenic diet in a couple of weeks. That's sort of on the metabolic level, right? Like what's going on in the blood. For nerves to rewire, like sleep apnea, how long does it take to see an improvement with sleep apnea? 3 months. The data would suggest if someone's diagnosed with sleep apnea, so problems with oxygen, problems like the washing machine in the brain of sleep is a problem. It takes 3 months for the gray matter, the gray neuron cells in the brain to improve, 12 months for the white matter to improve. That's with consistent use of, let's say, a CPAP machine or some other kind of thing that's going to fix sleep apnea. That's by doing nothing else. So it can take weeks, months, it takes a while, right? It takes a while. That's because that's how the brain works, right? That's how the brain works. So I think our time's about up. So just in general, I think when we talk about what's an ideal approach, first thing is definitely act sooner rather than later. Go to someone that you have confidence in, that they know what they're talking about, they're listening to you. And then we collect a lot of data on people. We collect a lot of data. Sometimes it's so much data, it's hard to manage because people have it over there, or they have it over here. But a lot of layers of data we collect. The story, though, your story is most important, right? That's where we start, the story. We even have software to help us with that. But putting all this data together and then getting a plan together and then working the plan. Some people come in and they're like, well, tell me what I should do, and I'll do it for the rest of my life. It's iterative, that's how it works. So you try to fix one thing, you can't do all the things, we pick some priorities, you pick your priorities, and then we move, right? We move. And really, I do also think we need to probably be talking about the prospect, the possibility that you can live well, or better at least, than you think, even with Alzheimer's. And certainly, we should be doing more to prevent it, but even for those that already have contracted this, or in the throes of this, there's so much that we do and that we can do for these folks. And that's it. That's really what if anybody's interested. In this particular slide, this is sort of the summary of Nate Bergman's summary of knowns for what it's worth. And anybody that wants to stay for questions, I'm certainly available for questions. Thank you. Thank you for your time.